All right, like I said a couple seconds ago, this is Final Cut Pro Help Live. It's episode 14, an introduction to eGPU. And I'm really excited for this episode. I've been playing around with some eGPUs this past month. I learned a lot myself, so we have some interesting, at least for me, I think, interesting information to provide to all of you. And I posted a bunch of questions on the Instagram and Twitter accounts for at Final Cut Pro Help Live. And the most common question was simply, what is an eGPU? What is it? Well, we're going to answer that here in this stream. So sit back, relax, and like I said earlier, if you got any questions, put them in the chat. If you're watching this live, if you're in the US like I am, it is a late night show. But if you're watching this on replay, you can also put any questions you have down in the comments there, and I'll try to get to them. Hopefully, this stream will answer just about every question you have about an eGPU. If it doesn't answer the question, it should definitely give you some resources on where to look next. So the first thing I have here is just a setup. This is a picture from an Apple support article that's linked down below there. And this is just kind of a general setup that you would see with an eGPU. So on the right there, we have a MacBook Pro. We have an external display connected in the middle. And then that thing over on the left side there, that is the Blackmagic eGPU. And it's connected and essentially bringing more power to all of this. One thing you can use an eGPU for is powering an external monitor, like you see in this setup here. But we're going to see that it's used for many more things than just that. So you can buy an eGPU just like you see there, or you can actually build one. So we're going to show a couple of those things. I'm going to show you how to configure Final Cut Pro to really take advantage of this eGPU. Hopefully, I will let you know as well which systems are actually compatible with an eGPU, because you don't want to be going out and buying one or thinking about configuring a system if you can't actually run it. So all of that should get answered here in this stream. And like I said, we're going to talk about what an eGPU is. I'm going to tell you a couple places where you can get one. We're going to go through setting up, configuring, and actually using an eGPU. I have a little video recorded of actually building a custom eGPU, which is the one I actually am using to run our setup today. And this is the first time I'm using it for a live stream. So hopefully everything goes smoothly with that. And we'll do some demoing as well as actually using it in Final Cut. And then we have a small Q&A at the end of the demo here. Again, though, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat there. I'll try to get to those, whether they're eGPU related or not. We can go through all that kind of stuff. So let's start out with what is an eGPU. So it's simply, an eGPU just stands for an external graphics processor or unit, processor unit. And all of the computers, for the most part at this point, your Macs, all of them have a built-in GPU of some sort. They might be integrated into the rest of the system, or they may be a dedicated GPU. Either way, they're inside your Mac right now. You can't really go in and pull them out easily unless you have a Mac Pro or something external there. But the external GPU is simply a box that can connect to a Mac, and then it gives you more GPU processing power. And a little bit later, we'll see where that actually comes into play and how you can utilize that. To actually utilize it, though, you do need a Thunderbolt 3 equipped Mac with macOS High Sierra version 10.13, specifically 0.4 or later. So if you are running, like me, I'm running 10.14. That also supports the eGPU, and you're able to utilize it for that additional graphics performance. So that's kind of an overview of what an eGPU is as far as the physical box itself. Where can you get one? Well, there's kind of two places you can get one. You can either buy one that's already configured for you, like we saw in that picture was a Blackmagic eGPU. Apple actually sells those, so you can get them directly from Apple. You can get them from the suppliers, so like Blackmagic, you can go and get one there. Amazon sells a whole bunch, and many, many other electronic resellers out there. B&H Photo Video I saw had a whole bunch. There's many out there that'll sell you a ready-to-go package that essentially all you need to do is plug in the power cable and the Thunderbolt 3 cable from the eGPU box into your Mac, and then you're going to be ready to go. The other option, though, is to actually build one yourself. You can save some money by building it instead of going through and buying a prepackaged one. Now, that's what I'm going to show a little bit later, is how to actually build them, because they are fairly simple. If you're at all familiar with any kind of electronics, taking them apart, putting them together, even a Mac Pro, if you've opened those up, they're very simple to put in a hard drive, take one out. That's essentially what building an eGPU is. You just need a box and then the actual card, and you put the two together. I mean, that's basically all it is. But I'll show you that a little bit later in this stream here. So you can save a good amount of money too by building one, which is what I ended up doing it. So how do you actually set up the eGPU though? Whether you build one or you buy one that's pre-configured, you need power to the eGPU. So you need a way to connect it. And this is something that when you go to buy an eGPU, or when you build one yourself, especially when you build one yourself though, you can get different boxes that actually take different amounts of power. And if you're using these boxes to actually power, say, a MacBook Pro or a portable machine, you can use that Thunderbolt 3 cable to charge the computer in addition to all the data transfers. If the eGPU doesn't have enough power to charge, say, a 15-inch MacBook Pro, you might run into some issues. But for the most part, most of these eGPU boxes, especially the pre-configured ones, can power any Mac that you can connect to it as far as the MacBook Pros go. So you do need a power cord, though, just in general. So this isn't something you're going to be remotely plugging in just with the Thunderbolt 3 cable. It can't power it. You do need a dedicated power supply, at least for all of the ones that I've come across through. Okay, next you need a Thunderbolt 3 connection. This is very important. There are many Macs that are being sold right now by Apple, the current generation versions, not anything old, but just the current generation versions even, and a lot of them don't have Thunderbolt 3 connections. So they may have a USB-C connection, which physically looks the same, or they might even have a Thunderbolt 2 connection, but for eGPUs, it does need to be a Thunderbolt 3 connection. So if you're configuring your Mac and you're going to purchase one, make sure that's an included spec on there. Or if you're buying used, make sure it's got Thunderbolt 3. That's important. Otherwise, you won't be able to take advantage of this. And then as far as all this stuff goes, if you can, having a connection to an external display is a nice way to go. So you just have your power, your Thunderbolt 3 connection to your Mac, and then if you have an external display that you're using, you can connect that to the eGPU itself. And most eGPUs that I've seen include additional connections, so you can then connect additional devices. So as an example, the eGPU I built has 3 DisplayPort connections and 1 HDMI connection on it. So those ports, I have a DisplayPort to mini DisplayPort, so I can connect my Mac's external display, an Apple external display here. And then the HDMI cable goes over to an HDMI connection on a TV screen, which I can then use as a monitor and output for Final Cut Pro, which is a nice way. If you're an editor with Final Cut, it's a nice way to have a monitor all the stuff. It's a live output right from Final Cut. So what you're seeing on your timeline, you know you have a viewer that you see on your computer monitor. That viewer is then mirrored out to the HDMI screen that you have. And in addition to that, if you have a Blackmagic eGPU or another one, you might have different ports on it where you can connect additional hard drives and other devices. So that's how you set it up. Plug in the power, plug in the Thunderbolt, connect the display if you have it, and connect your other stuff, and you're done. There's no software installed. There's nothing else. macOS has all of this stuff built in. I thought that I might have to download and install a driver or get an update. There's none of that, which is really nice with macOS. So the other thing I want to show here before we dive into it is just some resources, because there is a lot of information available and it can get kind of confusing. So I'm going to show a couple websites here. The first and most important one is just apple.com/support. They have a ton of articles related to eGPUs and other kind of areas that you're going to run into when you're working with these GPUs. So the first one, these are article numbers. You can also search for the terms there. First article is HT 208544. And it's titled Use an External Graphics Processor with Your Mac. And that article, we're actually going to go through some of that here in the demo in just a second. But that article has a ton of information, including a list of the recommended brands and specific graphics cards. So if you're planning on building one yourself, you want to make sure that you look at this article, look at the actual GPUs that are listed on there, because that's going to be what's supported with your Mac as far as the recommendations coming from Apple. If you get something that's off that list, it may work. Some people might say it works. It might not work in the future. You might have issues. Who knows? But I recommend sticking to this article for the ones you actually use. And it's you'll see I had a little bit of an issue in building mine just with branding because I was confused on it, but hopefully I'll clear those things up for you. The next article is HT 209134, and it's use Final Cut Pro 10 with an external graphics processor. So this specifically covers using Final Cut and how you can take advantage of that, and we'll see some of that in this one. Another one is HT 208897, using the Blackmagic eGPU with your Mac. You can get some tips on that one if you're thinking about getting the Blackmagic eGPU. If you want more technical information and some additional stuff, you can go to developer.apple.com/eGPU. And then another web page that's not an Apple web page, just a third-party one that I came across that I found pretty useful, is eGPU.io. And just tons of useful information on there, forums and everything. I recommend checking that out as well in your research. And again, just like I say in almost every video, I try to put this out there, and this is true for all of the content that I supply. This is all just my opinion. You shouldn't take what I say as the be-all and end-all for whatever your decision-making is. Make sure you do your research. If you have questions, you can always reach out to me, but I recommend getting information from multiple sources and multiple people to make the best decision, especially a purchase like this. eGPU price-wise can go from a few $100s up to a couple $1,000s or more, depending on what you're building. So, it can be a lot of money, so you don't want to just go based on just my opinion. Definitely do your research, check out all these articles, ask around, see what the best options are for you. All right, so now we're going to go through a little bit of a demo here on some of the things that I did. I'm going to show you some results that I found over using multiple different eGPUs and give you some information. Again, some of this stuff can be pretty confusing at times, so don't hesitate to jump in and ask those questions in the chat as you come across them. All right, so the first thing is, as far as all this stuff concerned, and I know a lot of this is going to be repeated information, but the first thing is, do you know what an eGPU is? That's kind of the first question you want to ask yourself. And from what I've said, basically the summary that I put into it is an eGPU is just a box that connects to a Mac or another computer, I guess. But in our case, when we're talking about Final Cut in the Mac, it's connecting to a Mac or your Mac to improve the graphics performance. So that's great, right? You kind of get some idea, but how do you know if an eGPU will actually be beneficial to you and in your setup that you're using there? So this is where we're going to go into those articles, and we're going to start off with that first one, which is HT. I'm going to load it up here, HT 208544. And let me move it on to the actual monitor so you can see this. You can do just a web search for this, or you can go on to apple.com/support and get directly to it. But this is the article. It's titled Use an External Graphics Processor with Your Mac. And this is such a great article. When I was first doing kind of some research on it, because I understood what an eGPU in general did, but I didn't know how it was going to actually affect my system. This article, though, I think answers just about every question with figuring out what these eGPUs are. It tells you, first off, what Mac can actually run it, which I mentioned earlier. It does have to be Thunderbolt 3 equipped, so make sure your Mac has that if you're running on an older machine or a less powerful machine like a MacBook. You might not have a Thunderbolt 3 connection on it. We talked about what an eGPU is. Basically, it's giving your Mac additional graphics performance. So for professional apps, which includes Final Cut Pro or 3D gaming, VR content, that type of stuff, you're going to see a benefit from this. So definitely read through this. You can see a list here of some of the things that an eGPU does as far as accelerating apps. It can charge your MacBook Pro while you're using it, which again, if you build your own Mac, or your own eGPU and connect it to your Mac, you want to make sure your custom built one has enough power to power your specific Mac on there. And something that's kind of cool, when you do have an eGPU connected, you can see in here in the picture here, you'll actually see this menu bar icon. And if I go up to my menu bar here, you can see it as well. And when you click on it, it'll give you an option to disconnect your eGPU. So similar to an external hard drive, when you connect an eGPU, your Mac's going to be running off of it. If you just unplug it, not a good thing. So you want to make sure that you disconnect it correctly there so you don't run into kind of unnecessarily interrupting the system. And I'll show some screenshots of what that looks like as well a little bit later. But through all this list here, the biggest thing I want to get to is here where it says view the activity levels of built-in and external GPUs by opening Activity Monitor. So Activity Monitor is what you're going to use to determine if an eGPU is actually going to be beneficial for you. And as far as all this stuff goes, working with these articles and working with any apps that you do, whether it be Final Cut or anything else, Activity Monitor is a great way to monitor all of the resources on your Mac, not just the GPU stuff. But we're going to focus on that in this little demo here. So I'm just going to go up and click on Spotlight, which is the overall search through your Mac. And I'm going to type in Activity Monitor, hit return to open up Activity Monitor. And I'm going to close out of this here for just a second. Let me minimize Final Cut. We'll kind of close some things just so you can see this little cleaner interface, maybe get rid of some things. So here is Activity Monitor. At the top, you have CPU, your system memory, energy, some different things that are on here. But to actually see your GPU usage, you're going to want to go up to the Window menu and then go down to GPU History. When you do that, I'm going to drag this window next to my Activity Monitor here. We can see the two different GPUs that my Mac is currently seeing. I have the built-in AMD Radeon Pro 560 card. That's the one that's inside of my iMac. And then in my eGPU that I've built, I have the AMD Radeon RX Vega 56, which is the same card, or basically the same architecture that's in the Blackmagic eGPU Pro version. So I could see both of these cards, and what you'll see is currently on my AMD Radeon Pro 560, you can see these blue lines going up and down, right? So when you do this on your Mac and you see this, those blue lines lets you know the usage of your graphics card. So right now, with streaming through OBS onto YouTube here, this live streaming and everything, it's currently set up to go through the built-in card. So I can see over here on the AMD Radeon, which is on my eGPU, a couple little blue dots right at the bottom. You might not even be able to see that over the stream, but it's not really taking advantage of it. But I can see on my built-in one, I'm using about 50%, we'll say. I'll even round down a little bit. We'll say it's only using half of the card. So if this is what you see, I would say you're not going to benefit a whole lot from using an eGPU. But this is what you can use to monitor what's happening on your computer. We can move this over. We can go into Final Cut, render some stuff, start doing a bunch of actions, and you might see these things change. So how can you know if an eGPU is going to be beneficial for you? Well, one, if you have a compatible machine, that's what you have to meet those requirements first. But then if you go into Activity Monitor, you show the GPU history. If you see these blue lines filling up the entire thing, you're probably going to benefit from an eGPU because you can load off a bunch of those tasks onto the eGPU instead of using your built-in graphics processor there. So that's how you can monitor what's happening. And yes, there are definitely other apps out there that you can download. There's things like, iStat Pro. There's a couple other ones that do a really great job of monitoring your system, and other stats that are in there might be able to give you a lot more details on what the GPU is actually doing. But in general, Activity Monitor, it's in all of your Macs. It's included with the operating system. This, in my opinion, really is the only thing you need to make a decision about how much that eGPU may benefit you. And again, if you're not seeing any blue here, if it's like this top area, you don't need an eGPU. If it's like this bottom area all the time, or even more blue, that's where your graphics card is working really hard, and an external one might be beneficial. So that's kind of the first part about it. Activity Monitor is excellent. And you'll see here as I go through, I'm just going to move this GPU history up into the corner. You can just watch how that changes throughout some of our demos here and what we change, just to get an idea of how that fluctuates from different things that we do. So what apps are actually supported by the eGPU? That's the next thing in this article, and you can certainly go through and read all of these individually. But the takeaway from this is not every app is going to benefit from an eGPU. The developers do have to design the capabilities to really take advantage of it. So just know that not every app is going to benefit from that. Not every game is going to benefit from it. So you do want to, spend the money on this if you actually have an app that's going to work with it. So the next thing is probably the most important part of this. If you buy the eGPU right now, say you get the Blackmagic one in an Apple store, you go home, you plug it in, you probably won't see any change in performance because you have to tell the system to use that eGPU. So this is something that is kind of a little annoying at first, but it's just annoying if you don't know it actually existed, because I connected it and I saw nothing up here. I didn't see anything going on, so I was like, all right, this isn't the greatest change. I don't know why this is something I would need. But what you have to do is just go into your applications folder and do Shift-Command-A here to show my applications folder. We'll go down to Final Cut Pro, and then I'm going to do Command-I on the keyboard to get information about it. You can certainly go up to the File menu as well. And then in the information, when you have an external graphics processor connected, you'll see this checkbox that says Prefer External GPU. So you do need to check that box to basically tell that app to use the external GPU. Okay? So for Final Cut, that's all you have to do. And again, that only shows up when you do have your eGPU connected. So if you're thinking about buying one right now, you're not going to see that checkbox there. That's okay. It will show up as long as you have a compatible computer when you do connect that eGPU. So that's what you have to do. That's what these steps say. And what I find is once I check that, I don't really have to do anything else. That's about it. So the other thing you can do, which is what I've done, and I found this to be just a lot easier. You should definitely still prefer apps and check that box that I just showed you. But you can also set the external eGPU when it's connected to an external display as the primary display. Now, this can be kind of confusing, especially since you're only seeing one monitor here and you're not seeing my whole setup. It might not make a ton of sense. But what's happening here is with your external monitor, when you go in and connect an external display, you're going to see something that looks like this inside of System Preferences. So if you go into System Preferences, click on the Display System Preference pane. When you have multiple monitors connected, you see an Arrangement tab. And you'll see these two rectangles representing each of your displays, and you can move them around for the arrangement of your displays, how they're physically set up. But then notice the little white bar that's on the top here. That actually represents which display is your primary display. And if you didn't know, you can actually grab that white bar, and you'll see over here on the picture on the left here, I've done this, and you can move that over to your external monitor. And if your external monitor is connected to your eGPU, you're then essentially telling the Mac to send all of the processing through that eGPU. Now, it doesn't happen all the time. You can see OBS here is still processing through my built-in card, even though it's connected over to the eGPU. So it's not foolproof. It's not going to send everything over there. But it certainly does take advantage of that eGPU on many apps, even when you don't check that box that says prefer an eGPU, at least in my experience. So that's what this next little section is. As far as setting an external eGPU as the primary display, that's what they're talking about there. I strongly recommend doing that as well, especially if you have a nice external monitor. You can go and do that. Now, I wish there was a way, and I don't know if this is true or not, but it seems like doing the checkbox to say prefer an eGPU and get info is a little cumbersome. So I think it would be really nice if in the future you could just have a system preference checkbox that just said send everything to the eGPU. Hopefully we'll get to that at some point, but we're not there right now. And so yeah, that's that part. And then the next part of the article is probably the most important part, and that's talking about what are the actual supported eGPU configurations. And this is a very important part, and I recommend reading this article thoroughly. I'm not going to go through it step by step, but this talks about all of the supported products, including here a list of the all-in-one eGPUs, which include that Blackmagic eGPU and eGPU Pro. You can see the Sonnet, Breakaway Puck, and some other products that are actually sold directly by Apple. You can buy them in other places as well. But then it goes into a list of cards that are supported. So these are the actual graphics cards and the boxes that are supported. So if you want to build your own eGPU, this is the part of the article that is the most important. Make sure that you're getting a card that is on this list of supported cards. So as an example, say you want to create a box, you might go through here and say, okay, I want an AMD Radeon RX 580. Maybe you want that specific card. Well, that's great. That's a supported card, but then you want to see here that it's recommended that you get one of these Thunderbolt 3 chassis for that card. So you'd want to make sure that you're getting a card that's on this list. Now, any of these things, you'll notice there's a little number on the right side on some of these. He's got 4s on it. Up here we had a number 5. If you're thinking about getting one of these, make sure to go down to the bottom. You'll see what each of those little kind of footnotes are. And for example, number 4 is these chassis provide at least 85 watts of charging power, making them ideal to use with a 15-inch MacBook Pro. So if your setup is a 15-inch MacBook Pro, that's something that might be important because these 3 have the number 4 on it, whereas the Power Color Devil Box does not. So maybe you want to use one of the other ones if you have a 15-inch MacBook Pro. So again, a lot of little details in here, but what I ended up going with is I looked at all the cards and all the things that were here, and I decided to go with this AMD Radeon RX Vega 56. And so I looked at it here, and it said these graphics cards are based on the AMD Vega 56 architecture, which is the same thing that the Blackmagic eGPU is based on. And then it says recommended graphics cards include the Sapphire Vega 56 and XFX Vega 56. Now, if you're like me, the first time I was reading this information, it all kind of ran together. I didn't realize that one of these things is actually representative of the brand and versus the architecture and what they are. So the AMD Vega 56, when you're seeing that part of it, that's the type of card, which is what they're referring to when they're saying architecture. That's the type of card. And then there's many brands that have created cards based on that architecture. So if you go onto Amazon or if you go to some other retailer and you're looking to buy this graphics card, if you search for a Vega 56 or an AMD Vega 56, you'll find probably the Sapphire brand and you'll find an XFX branded card, but you're also going to find other ones. I found one that was an MSI branded AMD Vega 56 card. And that's the one I ended up buying and I'm using currently. I find it works great. I don't have any issues with it. But as far as on here goes, the recommended brands are a Sapphire branded Vega 56 card and an XFX Vega 56. So getting one of those. So just keep that in mind if you're new to all of this. One of these things is the brand versus the card itself. And the naming on this article does not usually match what I'm finding on other websites. So that can get kind of confusing there. But once you've selected a card that you want to use, you can then go down and it says recommended Thunderbolt 3 chassis. And you could look through all of these, but depending on how you're building this, you might want to get a certain chassis for one thing versus another. And what I found for my setup, I ended up going with this box that is the 550 watt breakaway box. And I saved 100 or 200 bucks by going with that one versus the higher wattage one. I'm connecting it to an iMac. I don't need charging. That wasn't a thing for me, so I didn't need to worry about that side of it. I just wanted to make sure that it connected and went through. So the rest of this article goes through and talks about some other cards on here. You can also go down here. It says learn more. It's got some links to other articles and other things that might be helpful for you as well. Whew, but that is a lot of information, but that is essentially what this article does. It tells us, one, how to use the software in the OS. It tells us what cards to get and the actual chassis as well. So if you're going to build a custom one, you can do it all with information that's right on there. So now I want to go through and show you another website that you might be able to use to compare these cards, because I've seen that question came through when I was asking on Instagram. A couple of people mentioned some brands of cards and like which one to go with. And even on here, you're looking at all these different cards. Which one should you actually go for? Well, depends, one, on how much you want to spend, but also how much power you need. So there's a website that I came across under all this that was gpu.userbenchmark.com slash, I think it was /GPU. We'll see if it comes up here. Yeah, this is the one here. So this site, and most of this, they're not going to be talking about Final Cut specifically. It's going to be mostly PC gaming. That's where GPUs are really used, or maybe cryptocurrency mining, things like that. But on here, they rate all of the different video cards that are currently out and the different architectures. So you can actually scroll through all this and see the different ones that are on there. But then if we compare it over to our other article, we can look for a one of the compatible cards and see what's actually listed there. So if you're wanting to see the most benchmarked one, and as far as the kind of the best one on there, you can sort by that. You could do it by user rating, all kinds of different things. You can then on the left here narrow it down by brand and get some information on how things are rated and how they're coming in. So like our AMD RX 580, for example, is here. We could check that one off to compare it to another one. So let's see what else we have here. We have like the 570. We can hit compare, and it'll show both of those cards side by side, and we can get an idea of how much better performing the RX 580 is compared to the 570. So this site again is gpu.userbenchmark.com /GPU. That'll get you right to that page where you can compare all these cards. Again, if you're new to GPU stuff, it's a great place to go. You can learn some stuff on there. At least I got some information from it. And that kind of helped in the decision making and allowing me to understand what different cards are, how they perform, and how massive the GPU market is out there. So cool. So then let me show you a couple of other sites really quickly. If you go just to apple.com, basically in the search here, you can be able to search eGPU, and we should find the Blackmagic eGPUs. So on the right here, here's the standard eGPU. I can click on that and see some information about it. Just see how it's physically designed, the different ports on there. It gives you an idea of what's there. The standard eGPU from Blackmagic has the Radeon Pro 580 graphics processor with 8 gigabytes of memory in there. But what's really nice about this box is on the back side of it, it's got a bunch of USB ports and HDMI to Thunderbolt 3 connections. And it's a pretty nice design. Pretty nice designed machine there. So that's there at about $700. If we go back, we can see the eGPU Pro, and this one physically exactly the same look to it. But if we go down and look at the stats here, it's got the higher end graphics card in there with the Radeon RX Vega 56 graphics processor, 8 gigabytes of memory. And this is the same card that I got as well that you're going to see that I built into a custom box. And it performed identically. The custom build one that I did versus this eGPU Pro, as far as performance go, that I could see in all the benchmarks, identical, which is pretty cool. So let me show you some of those stats. Actually, really quickly here, and obviously you can do this as well, but if you go to Amazon, you can also search things like eGPU, and you'll find a whole bunch of the boxes that are here that you can then work with and purchase, and you'll see as far as all these go, here's the eGPU Blackmagic box that we just saw over on Apple's page. Yeah, a bunch on there that you can go and get, and some of these are vary as far as the actual power goes. This is the one that I ended up going with that you're going to see I build is the Sonnet one, and I went with the 550 watt one because you need enough power to power the actual card that you're working with. So as you're researching these, make sure you do get one that has enough wattage for what you need to do. But yeah, you can see here, I don't know why this price difference is here, but the 550 is what, $280 compared to $900 for the 650 watt. Outrageous price difference there in my opinion. That's why I went with the 550 and it works great for all that stuff. So yeah, Amazon, a bunch of other sites are out there though that you could use to go through all that. So let me show you some of the tests I got, some of the benchmarking. This might give you an idea of how these graphics cards perform through all of this. And I showed a bunch of activity monitor earlier, but I'm going to go here and show you just a couple screenshots from the testing that I did. Here I've switched over. I have Final Cut Pro exporting and rendering content, and notice the built-in graphics card's doing nothing. Everything is going over to the external, and this is what I'm talking about. When this blue is full and it's filling up the entire page on there, that means it's using 100% of that card. Love to see that. That means it's working very nicely. Right now, it doesn't seem like it can use both cards, so you kind of have to use one or the other. That's just as far as what I've seen. I haven't found a way to very usefully have something like Final Cut use both cards at the same time. Maybe we'll see that in the future, but right now you're just using one or the other, and the external one in my case, much more powerful, so I'm going to use that one instead of the built-in one, and that's what Activity Monitor looks like. Let's see another one with the when you show those little meters that are coming up there, you'll see the two cards showing up, and you can see here the built-in one, which is the bottom one, is using a little bit, and then the external one's using some. And you can also see your CPU history, and you can even extend these windows out to make them much taller. Notice side by side here, the taller the window is, just the more detail you're going to see in these graphs. With the CPU, if you drag it off, if you have a multi-core CPU, you can actually go through and see all of those being used at the same time. So that's just a couple tips about Activity Monitor. And again, all of that's done going up to the window menu. That's where you can hit GPU history. You can also do the CPU history and usage to see those little graphs if you need to. So definitely do that. That's a great way to see if you are actually going to benefit from an eGPU. Even before you purchase one, use Activity Monitor, see how much you're using. If you understand your system and how you're utilizing it, that's how you can really make these purchases worthwhile on there. So definitely do that as well. Let me now jump into this benchmarking folder. So there's a bunch of apps out there that you can run just to see how your system performs and kind of used it to test. And there's one called Heaven that's it's essentially like a gaming environment or gaming engine, and it runs this test. It takes about probably 2-3 minutes, right around that range. But it runs through a whole bunch of graphic stuff and then gives you a score of your system based on how it rendered. And it'll show you how many frames per second you're rendering. You can change all kinds of settings on there. But these were a couple benchmarks I did just to get an idea of, okay, how does the Blackmagic eGPU Pro perform compared to a custom-built one using the same architecture? And how does it compare to just the system alone? So let's start with just the iMac here. And this is the results from that test. On here, the things, you don't have to worry too much about all the stats that are on here. You can see what it's using right now. The GPU, it's using the Radeon Pro, which is just my built-in GPU. And it saw the external one as well, but it's not using it all to render. And in the middle here, I got frames per second. That's our FPS. My frames per second was 19.5. And if you're used to gaming or even video editing, pretty standard video is 30 frames per second. So we're getting less than standard video quality on here with just the built-in GPU, no eGPU being used. So then I went over and connected the Blackmagic eGPU. With the Blackmagic eGPU connected with only the iMac, so nothing else, this was the score that I got, which is a 52.7 frames per second, which not too bad, right? And then I connected the external display with the Blackmagic eGPU, and my score went up to 61 frames per second. So just using an external display bumped it about 10 frames per second, and I got better performance. And then we close all these out because they can get kind of cluttered. Let's just do a quick click on these. This is an external display, preferring the external, also about the same stats. So I'll quickly cycle through these again. About 60, 61 frames per second when we have that external eGPU used, and about 52 with only the iMac. So definitely having an external monitor helps out. And then comparing that to the custom eGPU, this is where all the numbers were about the same. So with the external display, we got 58 frames per second, 59, and then 52 with only the iMac. So almost identical, maybe a frame or two difference for frames per second, but basically identical. Again, this is the Blackmagic one, 60.6 versus over here we got 59.2. So almost identical scores. I would imagine there's going to be some variance, but basically identical. And 60 frames per second, anything over that or around that is amazing for the gaming stuff. It looked really good. And again, going back to the iMac only, we had only 19.5 frames per second. So clearly this test alone was an eye-opener for me. I put numbers on it to let me know how much that eGPU is performing. Just for the fun of it, I have access to a 2015 MacBook, so I ran the test on that. It got a whopping 4.6 frames per second. So fun test to run. As far you can see at the bottom here what I had everything set to, I just put it on the extreme quality and the extreme preset that was there. That's what all of those ran at to get these results that we're seeing here. So that's one thing. Benchmarking is great, but then I wanted to see some actual real world results. So that's when I went in and started exporting stuff from Final Cut Pro. And this, if you're an editor, this is the important stuff, because this is where you're actually saving time. So I took a timeline that was pretty simple, had a couple layers on it, some effects. It wasn't just one video layer, a couple different things on there, and then I exported them. So with no eGPU connected, it took me, this is just my stopwatch app on my iPhone, it took about just over 24 minutes to export this video from Final Cut. And with the custom-built eGPU, it took 11 minutes. So we went from 24 down to just over 11. Huge cut in time. I mean, that's over half of the time being saved on exporting, and then almost identical times with the Blackmagic one. So a custom-built one versus the Blackmagic one, we're seeing identical times. That tells me there's really no difference as far as performance goes initially with using the Blackmagic compared to the custom-built one. But again, 24 minutes down to 11, really big change there as far as the export times, and that's Final Cut. Again, just sharing a timeline directly from Final Cut. So does it make a difference? Yes, it makes a ton of difference. And I'm even on an iMac with the 21-inch iMac with a higher-end card that you could get at the time. So really, really nice to see those performance changes there. So, yeah, hopefully that helps out a little bit with that. I want to show a couple other screenshots here. This is the menu bar icon. Again, you saw it up at the top here that you can click on, and you'll get an option there to disconnect whatever eGPU you have connected. That's a great way to know that the system is recognizing it. When you do go to disconnect an eGPU, just by hitting that option there, you may get a message that looks like this that says you can't disconnect it because the following apps really are using the eGPU. And this is similar to an external hard drive. It might be in use and you can't eject it or get rid of it. So you either have to wait for those apps to stop using the eGPU or you have to quit those apps. If you do just decide to power off the eGPU, the external one, or unplug it without ejecting it correctly, you'll get a message that looks like this that says the GPU is not disconnected properly and you want to disconnect it correctly in the future. And this is important. You can corrupt things. It's similar to just unplugging an external hard drive without ejecting it. Most of the time, nothing happens and it's fine, but sometimes you can corrupt data and lose stuff. So don't do that. Just take the time to eject it. Worst case, if it doesn't seem to eject or go away, you can just shut down your Mac and then unplug it safely. I will say, in my experience with this, when I go up and hit the little icon, the menu bar icon, this little chip there, when I hit that and I choose to eject it, everything seemed to kind of freeze or stall for a second, and then it went through and ejected it. So it's not instant for sure. It does take a couple seconds to go through that process and switch over. So if that's happening to you, that's normal as far as I can see. And then this is another message you might get that says it cannot use the Thunderbolt accessory. Thunderbolt accessories are not supported on this Mac. So this is the message that I got when I connected the eGPU to that 15-inch MacBook. It doesn't have a Thunderbolt port on it. If you have a Thunderbolt 2 port or older, or just a USB-C port, you might see a message like this. It still allowed me to charge the computer through my eGPU box though. So that was nice. You still get power going through it. It's just you won't be able to send any video or anything else through it. But you should see that message if you're not on a supported machine. Cool. And then I already showed this with changing the menu bar over to get that going through. So let me show you a couple other actual scenarios here. These are going to be some sound things to consider because, again, for me, price-wise, to build the eGPU box, to buy the box, the breakout box, and the card, put everything together after tax, probably about $700, $750, right in that range, whereas the equivalent for the Blackmagic eGPU after tax, I was looking at about $1,300, a little bit more. So what's the difference that I saw between them? Because I just showed you a bunch of graphs performance-wise, they're about the same. Well, the build quality is definitely something that's different. I'm going to show you how I built mine. The Blackmagic eGPU is extremely well built, and it is super quiet. So I put together this little presentation here so you can get an idea of the sound differences between the different ones. So I have a camera set up here. I put an app on another device that I'm using to check the volume level. This app is just on the iOS App Store. You can get it. It's just called Decibel X. Great app. Might be hard to see there, but on the right side, I'll blow this up so you can see it fully. But on the right side, it's got a list of what these decibel ratings are. And we're just going to kind of play through this so you can get an idea of it. This first video is with the iMac only, just the external display, and I'm sharing a project. Decibel-wise, I'm about 38, 39 decibels, which is the equivalent of about a quiet whisper. So very, very low volume. You would just hear kind of a little tone going on, not too much. So then fast forward, I'm going to go through here and connect this is going to be I believe the Blackmagic box. No, this is going to be the iMac with the custom eGPU. So notice when I'm sharing a project, I'm getting up to about 45, 48 decibels. I think it goes up to at one point, almost 10 decibels more. You might be able to hear that fan noise. So it's definitely a little bit louder noise there. It's not completely silent. And then going back to the Blackmagic eGPU there setup, when this one was going, this one very, very quiet. We're back down to about 40 decibels. It is slightly more noise compared to just the iMac itself, but still very, very quiet. So, that's something you're going to pay more for the Blackmagic eGPU box, and performance-wise, you're going to get the same performance. However, with all of that said, you are, it's just a much, much better build quality compared to these other boxes. So if cost is a concern, then going with a custom built one can be a great way to save some money. If cost is not an issue and you want to keep the noise around your system lower, then you might want to go with the Blackmagic there. Now, this is one thing, I don't know how well this is going to come across the YouTube stream here, but I did notice this, and with my custom built one, because it was a little bit louder, it kind of masks this noise. But on a timeline, as you're moving around, you know this with Final Cut, you have all this live skimming, which is really cool to be able to see everything, right? But as I did this, each time I would drag around, I found, and this actually happens on both the eGPUs, but they make these little clicking noises. It's actually the graphics card inside making these noises. So I just wanted to throw this out there. You're going to hear the general hiss of background noise here, but try to see if you can hear the little clicking noises that they make. Those clicks were happening as I dragged my cursor here across a Final Cut timeline. So this is just something to be aware of. I thought it was interesting, so I figured I'd show it here and play this. So again, it's very, very, very subtle. I don't even know if you could hear that, but if I put my ear kind of close to the system, or even if it was really quiet and I did that, I could notice it. So that was just something that I was like, thought it was interesting to note here. So now we're going to take a couple minutes here. I'm going to show you how I built the eGPU box. The audio is not great on this. It wasn't a good mic or anything, but this should give you an idea of building that box. eGPU. We have received in the mail 2 boxes. One that is an actual breakaway box. This is essentially the casing that the graphics card is going to be inside. And then in additional to the breakaway box, we have a graphics card. This one is an MSI graphics card. It's the Radeon RX Vega 56. So we have these 2 packages, and essentially we're going to go through with these parts and build our eGPU. It's very straightforward. The summary is we're putting this card into this breakaway box. So let's go ahead and unbox these 2 products here. I've actually already got them out of the box, so we don't have to wait for that. So this is the Sonnet breakaway box. And we can see the breakaway box. It's the 550 is the version for this one. This is what it looks like. This is the back side of it, which is the most important part. Right now there's no graphics card or video card inside, but we do have our Thunderbolt 3 connection. There's the power connection. Inside of the box for this product, we do get a power cable. You do not have to supply your own. And we're going to go through the steps on this one. The other part or piece of this project is the actual video card or graphics card. That's what this one is here. When you get it out of the box, a lot of times all the connections, which we have some display ports and a HDMI connection, you will have a little connector to cover up these ports just for protection. You should definitely take all of those off. I find if you keep them on, it overheats those ports and can definitely cause damage. Heat is a big thing with this card. It's a pretty beefy one here. So we have the connectors on it, which we're going to use in a second when we get into the actual box. There's the fan, all pretty straightforward. Just as a side note with all of this, you should definitely, if you have it at your disposal, be on a mat on your table. I do not have one, unfortunately. And then if you can, ground yourself. That way you can avoid damage to the electronics. All right, so let's get to it with this breakaway box. It's pretty simple. It does come in with instructions, and I strongly recommend that you follow those. But first thing, we have no power connection. It's just the box right now. There's these 3 pins around the edge. There's also one here. This is the 4th one. But start by removing these 3 pins. They're just pretty simply just unscrew them. Each of these pins, by the way, does have a little tiny washer on it. Let me get that into the angle there. A little tiny plastic washer. These washers that are on the screw there, pretty fragile, so try not to screw in too tight when you do go to put those in, because they just crumble. I had one of those crumble on me. So now what we're doing is taking off this back casing, which it goes around one side, over the top, and then down the other side. The way the instructions, at least that I remember, have this going is we kind of lift up from the back. You'll see it kind of lifts up for you because it's connected on this side. So after you lift it up, then you pull it back towards the back of the casing, and it'll kind of pop up off here. I then found the easiest thing to do next is kind of take each of the sides and pry them apart from the bottom. There's a little connector at the front side of it, so if we take those 2 connectors, kind of just spread it apart a little bit, this casing then just lifts right off, and I find that's the best way to avoid any of these edges scratching up the rest of the casing, just to try and avoid that. Even with that said, there's still some little scratches on it, so we're going to put that off to the side for now and take a look inside this case. Right, this is pretty cool. So inside of this case, there are a couple fans. There's the power supply in the back here that does have a fan of its own, and then there's a kind of an exhaust fan up at the front here, and then there'll be another fan inside the actual video card, which is going to be placed in this slot here, and then we have our cables to connect for power and everything to the card. So let me put this back down and let's get this card in here. So I do recommend taking the cables that, at least for this model, are the white and black cables, and kind of resting them off to the side just so you have a clear path for your card to get into that slot. However, before we actually put the card into that slot, we do need to open up the back side here, because right now it's covered by these little plates in the back. And what you're going to do first is undo that 4th screw that's in the back, and you can just undo that. I guess you could do this either right now or after taking out these 2 screws. So you're going to need a Phillips screwdriver to do this. Make sure it's the right size. It's in the instructions, but make sure it's the right size so you can avoid stripping any screws. But do take note that these screws are on the outside of this little metal plate that's here. So when we go to put it back, that's something I actually put the screws in before putting on the plate and then had to undo everything. So just when you put these off to the side, I'd put them off with this plate that was covering those slots. That way you can, it maybe be easier to remember where they go. And then inside the actual casing, we do have these 2 covers, so we're just gonna pop those off. They're just these little plates, right? So pretty simple. I believe you can get some cards that maybe only need 1 slot instead of taking both of these out. In this case, the card that I have is 2 lanes, so we're going to take out both of these, and we're not going to be putting these back in my case. So I recommend holding on to all this stuff. You never know when you need it in the future, so just put it back into that breakaway box or somewhere else that you want to keep it. But in this case, if you do have kind of your dual thicker video card that you're putting in, you're not going to need those 2 little covers in the future. Okay, so now we're ready to go. We have the opening in the back ready. Everything's here. This is a pretty wide card, so if your card is similar to this, you want to be careful going into it. You may need to go from the side up and in, or you can go from the top down. I like going top down. When I do this, I'm making sure the connectors are facing the back. I'm also making sure that these little pins here, or little, whatever you want to call these little parts here, these are facing down, and we can see the top is up here. right? So think about it, just those two little covers that were back there we're taking out, essentially we're just replacing them. So make sure that you're putting it in the same way. The other part, I don't know if this is going to be the same with all cards, but at least with this one, when we put it in, the wording is read correctly. It's not upside down. So just keep an eye on all those little things. And then when we slide this in, I'm going to be looking directly from the top to make sure the cables are out of the way. I'm trying to avoid hitting the edges to scratch anything up. And then the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to kind of angle it down a little bit. And let me take the card back out. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to angle it down like this so that it's angled with this part. I'm aiming these two things in first. And once those are kind of lined up, then I can push the rest of the card in. So I'll start by pushing it in and then kind of slide it into the place. So we're going to slide it down here. I'm going to angle it. I'm also looking at the actual connector for this card. And once everything gets lined up here, I can then go and just kind of push this down. You want to push it down with force so that it connects in. You might have heard there was a little clicking noise there, but now that card is in place. I can look at the top here, the silver part of this card, kind of lined up to those holes, which looks pretty good. I can look at the back side to make sure my connector is in there and all of the ports are accessible, which everything looks pretty good. I can feel that it's in there pretty securely as well. And then looking down at the bottom, it looks like the connector's in there, and I'm pretty happy with how everything looks there. So this looks really good. So now it's time to get our actual connectors connected to this card. So where these are, you'll see that these connectors have, there's actually 4 separate kind of groupings of cables. So you just want to keep these paired together, and you'll see it on the card itself. And you just line them up. I don't think you can put these in really in the wrong direction because it's they clip in a certain way. So you'll hear that when they connect in. The card is still loose, so I'm putting a little bit of pressure on the top of this card, barely any, just enough to keep it in while I connect these cables. That way the card doesn't fall back. So it does take a little bit of force back here to get these cables connected. Alright, and then once those are connected, pretty secure and the cabling looks good. That's awesome, right? That's pretty good. We can now start to get this reassembled back to where it was. So before I actually put on the outer casing, I'm going to leave that for last. We're going to get our cover here. Again, the cover goes on first, so we're looking straight down at the card and the holes that are down here because we have to line up essentially 3 holes. There's going to be the hole for this plate, this little tiny piece. There's the holes or spacing for the actual card, which I can see a hole that's right here, and then there's a second one up here. And then the last hole is down below, which is on the black part that's at the bottom here. And again, if you have a different case or a different breakout box that you're using, it may look different, and that's okay, but the process is all going to be about the same. So now I'm lining up a screw here. I'm going to hold it with one hand. I'm going to use my other hand to grab the screwdriver. I actually like to screw kind of reverse, right? So unscrewing it till I hear a little click. That way the screw's lined up perfectly vertically, and now I can screw to the right to get this in place. I'm trying to kind of move it around, make sure that it's getting into all 3 holes. If it doesn't feel like it is, you might have to readjust the card a little bit until it pops down, which I felt it there pop down, so now I can go through and screw this in. With this one, about finger tight is probably fine, which means you're not going to be on on it like gripping it. You're just going to want to lightly screw this in, almost so that just your finger force, like when I turn it like this, is about how it's in. There's no need for it to be in there with an extreme amount of force, in my opinion. And then same thing on this one. I'll go and screw this one in. I have to do a little bit of force just to get it through the initial slots there, but then finger tight on the end is fine. And then we'll go and get our 4th little screw here and get that top part of this. And this one, you could probably screw this top one in first before getting those other 2 Phillips screws in. Might be a little bit easier. All part of the game here. And yeah, even this, let me show this a little bit closer. You can see because I did those other 2 screws first, Is it visible? Yeah. This is where that hole is, and it's not aligned exactly where it needs to be. So now I'm going back and unscrewing and loosening up these two Phillips screws just to give me a little bit of movement so I can get this fourth one in. So the order that you do these in can definitely make a difference, but don't fight it. If it feels like you're putting a lot of force into any of these screws, just take a quick break, relook at the situation, and see why that's happening, because you really shouldn't have to do that. And then all of this, the most important thing is that my card is actually staying in place. So just keep an eye back here on the card, make sure that it's pretty well in there and not jiggling around or anything like that. It doesn't have a lot of movement. Okay, cool. So we have a card in a box. The cables are all connected. I'm going to review everything here to make sure it looks good. I'm about to put on the outer casing, so I want to make sure the cables are not in the way. Make sure nothing else, maybe a loose cable inside, like this could move outside somehow. You don't want that. You want to avoid when you go to put the outer casing on, that it doesn't actually cut any cables or get in the way of anything. So I've reviewed everything. It looks good. So now it's time to put on the casing. And again, with the casing, there's only one way to put this on. The back side of it includes these two little bumps on either side, or notches. The front side, it does not. And then if you remember, when we unscrewed it the first time, we had to kind of pop up the back side. So that's how this is going to go back in. So I'm going to angle the front side of it in. I'm going to spread kind of the two edges apart slightly to drop it on down. And then we can go through and slide this on. Now, one little just tip about this box, in the lower, if you're looking on the side of it, the lower right corner, there is a little spot that has to, while it's still angled, get aligned correctly for the edge. So what I mean is, if you're going to put this on and it feels like this side is out too much, you're going to want to backtrack and re-angle it up a little bit, and then it'll slide in, because it's right in this spot where it's catching to stay in there. So looks pretty good. There's a little opening or gap at the beginning here, so I'm going to push this to the right, because that needs to be closed. And then, yeah, you can hear it kind of clicked in there. If I look at the back, this top part, this top rim of the outer casing is pretty much right up against, right flush with the back side there. So looks great. It's now time to put those 3 screws back on so that the casing stays with the actual breakout box. If any of these are loose, I haven't run into this. I don't know if it is actually a thing, but if any of these are loose, you might hear a little like rattling or something else going on. So if that happens, kind of review everything that you did. Even if you have like almost like a little grinding noise or a little buzz that it sounds like is happening inside, it could be that a cable is resting against one of the fans in there, or something else similar. So you do want to kind of keep an eye on it. Since you are building this box, you're essentially responsible for all those little things. So make sure just to review it. Don't worry, don't be scared of it. Just if you hear something, power it down, open the box back up, try to take a look at what that is. You can certainly plug it in and turn it on with this casing open. Just be very careful with that. Look up all the right ways to have it, because especially with power, a lot of times you don't want to be grounded in those cases. So just be careful if you're running this thing with this actual outer casing off. But that can be a good way to troubleshoot it. You can look at it. If there's some kind of clicking or it sounds like a cable is resting against a fan or something like that, you can look at it with it powered on, power it off, make sure it's unplugged, the power's out of it, then you can go back into it. All of that is just my opinion. It's not what you should do. You should definitely get training on any electronics and working with this, and follow all the instructions that were included, both in this case with the breakaway box and the actual video card. If you get something like the Blackmagic eGPU, in that case, it's all in one unit. It's pretty straightforward. You don't have to worry about this kind of work. But I find you can definitely save some money by going this route. It might not be the same quality that you're getting out of a Blackmagic box, but still is a great addition. So the final thing about this one, and in getting this set up, on the back side of it, you do have a power connection, so you're going to use the included power cord to connect this to your outlets. I recommend definitely using a surge protector that's compatible with this amount of power. And then on the right side, like I mentioned earlier, make sure to remove any covers that are on the ports. This allows for a little bit more ventilation and avoids any kind of issues with those connectors. The breakaway box, in my case, did come with a Thunderbolt 3 cable. You do have to make sure it's a Thunderbolt 3 cable. It'll say it on the cable itself. But all you have to do is connect the power cord and that Thunderbolt 3 cable to your iMac, power this box on, and you're good to go. If you don't see anything happening with the box, it could be because your Mac is not powered on. So make sure that's turned on as well. Also make sure that your software and Mac OS version is up to date. That way it can support this one if it's on the correct version. The final note about this is you can run everything without having anything else connected to the actual card, but if you do want to power, say, an external monitor, a TV screen, another monitor of some sort, you can connect those to any of these ports. Again, this card specifically had 3 display ports and then a HDMI cable. So you can get DisplayPort to mini display or other types of connections to get in here as well. But that is building a custom eGPU box. I hope you enjoyed, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them down in the comments or ask them by sending an email to finalcutprohelp@me.com.
And there you have it. That's building an eGPU box, just the custom one. And all of those parts, both of those things, the card itself and the breakaway box, I got both of those on Amazon. And yeah, like I said in the video, you could save a decent amount of money going that route. However, you do want to get training on it. You want to make sure that you understand what you're doing, because it is very easy to short out a card or damage it in a way that makes it not worthwhile. So we're at about an hour now. I do want to get some Q&A in, but that's kind of all the information I wanted to put out there about an eGPU box. You can see that it does have great benefits in terms of export times, render times, even we talked about all motion or all Final Cut stuff, but I use it with Motion and other apps as well. And it's very beneficial if you do a lot of rendering. It can definitely save you some time. I did see a couple other questions come through on Instagram. One of them was, what's the best eGPU for a 27-inch iMac? And I don't know, pretty much everything I've said so far, as long as you have a Thunderbolt 3 equipped Mac, it's really going to be the same across all of those lines there. So what's good for a MacBook Pro is also going to be good for a 27-inch iMac, and it really depends on what graphics card you have in that iMac. If you have an iMac Pro that's a 27-inch iMac, your card might be better than the one you're going to get and build into an eGPU. But as far as best, I had it and I tried it out. That was definitely the Blackmagic eGPU Pro. As far as what I can see for a single eGPU, that's probably the best one. And that's why I built a custom one using the same architecture that's in that eGPU Pro. But build quality and everything was great on that one. And with all this too, Final Cut can't, at least right now, utilize more than one GPU at a time. As far as the eGPU goes, but you can have multiple eGPUs connected to your Mac as well. So you can have one doing one thing and another doing another, or maybe there are some apps that support it, but that's something you can do as well. But I don't think there's, at least at this moment, a reason to do one for a 27-inch iMac versus another for a different Mac. Another question I got is, what Mac configuration do I have? I'm using a 21-inch iMac. It's a 2017 model. So very recently, Apple came out with the 2019 iMac. The one generation back is what I have, the 21-inch iMac. And my Mac on there, basically, it's the high-end 21-inch iMac. So that's what I use here. I'm a big fan of using a minimal system. I try to save money where I can, especially on the systems. And that's something that's really great about these eGPUs is you can get an iMac or a MacBook Pro or another Mac without spending a bunch of money on the card in those. And then when you connect your eGPU, you're giving all that graphics power to it. And that's why you saw in a setup, if you go on to Apple's website, they have a lot of advertisements where they have a Mac Mini, and connected to the Mac Mini is the eGPU, and then external displays and all of that. So that's what's really exciting about this is you don't have to spend all this money directly with Apple buying the initial system. You can just get a system that maybe is lacking on the graphics side of it, and then just plug in the eGPU later when you do have the capital to get something like that. And then the final question I saw come across with this is, what's a good 4-window setup? And I didn't know fully what this question was asking, so I took it as you want to have 4 displays set up at the same time. And what's a setup that you can do with that? Well, Final Cut Pro, when you go in, we're in the interface here on Final Cut Pro. This is a single window layout right now, what you're seeing. And you can go up to the window menu, and you can go down to show in second display, and even workspaces, you'll have a dual display workspace. And this allows you to take either the browser, which is the area on the left here, the viewer, which is our actual picture that we're seeing, or the timeline at the bottom, and you can move either of those areas over to a second monitor. So that's great for 2 monitors. If you then plug in, like in my case on my eGPU, I have a monitor connected to an HDMI port, so then I can have my AV output, which means what I'm seeing in the viewer is also shown on a third display. And then your 4th display, you can have all your other apps that you want over there. Or as an example, there are other floating windows that you can bring up inside of Final Cut. For example, you could have the background tasks window, and you could move that over to your 4th window. Maybe your keywords, you can move that over. You have a bunch of other little windows that do come up when you're using Final Cut that you can move over to those other areas. Unfortunately, right now, unlike older versions of Final Cut in other apps, you can't like detach the inspector or the effects or those things and move them over. Definitely apple.com/support, or sorry, apple.com/feedback. If you go there, you can give feedback on Final Cut. You can also go up to the Final Cut Pro menu, and there's an option here that says provide Final Cut Pro feedback. So especially with these eGPUs, being able to connect multiple monitors is fairly easy. So it's not really optimized for a 4-monitor, 4-display setup right now, but give that feedback, and hopefully they'll add that in at some point, because that would be a pretty cool thing to get into. So cool. So that's all the information I have right now on eGPU. I'm sure there's some things I missed, so if you have any other questions with that, put them in the comments below or send me an email using finalcutprohelp@me.com. I do want to get a couple questions in here. I got 4 questions that we're going to go through. The first one came through, and the person asked, is there a way to create a color mask and then apply a blur to just that color mask so that I effectively just blur all the parts of the image that are a specific, in this person's case, blue color? So yes, you can definitely do this. Let me switch over to my stock library. So I just have 2 pictures here. But essentially what the person is asking is they want to apply a blur filter to just a color. Like in here we have the black, or here we have, in the background we have the green color, right? So if you go down to your effect, the way the person asked this question is they're wondering, can they create a color mask and then apply a blur to the mask? Well, actually, what Final Cut allows you to do is the reverse, which is kind of cool. So you can go and apply your effect, which I'll do the Gaussian blur. I'm just going to drag it onto my subject here. And then with most effects, if you go into the effect name in the inspector, on the right side is a mask button that shows up. It's hidden until you move the cursor over it. But when you click on that mask, you get the option to add a shape mask. And this is very common. You'll have a shape here that you want to put her around. So I might put her the blur right around our face to blur out our face, right? And then I have the feathered edge there. So that's how you can do a shape mask. But you also get the option to add a color mask. So when we hit add color mask, let me actually reset this. I'm going to remove my shape mask. And let's also get rid of these. I'm just going to hit delete with them selected, the mask part. All right, now we're going to do add color mask. I get the eyedropper, and I can click and drag across the green background here till I get most of the green, and then let go. And now the blur has only been added to the green. There's a little bit of fall off that's happening with the softness on the edges there, but then I get that amount that I can change and blur out the background. So this is a very, very rough kind of pass there. I could do the same thing here. I'll just blur out the white background. Again, hitting the mask, add color mask, and then click and drag on the background. And when I let go, now just the background is blurred out. Notice it doesn't even look like a brick wall anymore. If I let go of Gaussian, this is before and after. So blurred, no blurred. So that's on a Gaussian blur effect. You can do this on any effect. When you click that add mask button, you can do it with a shape, or you can do it in this case with a color mask. So yes, you could definitely do that. Next question came over from Instagram. Someone reached out, and you can definitely do this on Tude. Just follow at Final Cut Pro Help on Instagram. Send me a DM on there, and I'll try to answer any questions that you throw at me through there. But they wanted to show how to recreate an effect out of a video. So yeah, let me show this one. I don't know if I have the original. Yeah, I have the original video. Okay. So they sent me this video clip, and I'll just play this. It's 2 seconds. It's very fast. Then wanted to know how to recreate this effect. So very quick there, right? So I'm going to go through kind of frame by frame on here. So you have this person lying on the ground, and then right here at about 6 frames in, the video turns kind of a black and white there, and then it's also moving around. Notice how it shakes. Notice the ground is moving back and forth. And so the person asked, how can you recreate that effect? You can even see some lines going up and down here, like an aged film look. A lot of things that are built into Final Cut, but they're wondering how to create this effect. So I went through and created it. Here's a final look at what we're going to do here. So notice you have the shot, and then after a couple frames, the shot tilts with the plate in this case, and kind of settles down. And then we even see some of the film grain is in there as well. So let me show you how to kind of recreate that, or at least what I did to do this, and you can go through and do this as well. So with this, essentially the first 6 frames or so are basically the same, right? So I'm going to go through a couple frames and then hit the B key to bring up my razor blade. I can then cut it. I'm going to hit the A key to switch back to my arrow, move my playhead over. And this is now where we're going to start dropping down. So the first thing, actually, I'm going to select all of these and scale this video up just a little bit, probably like 115. By scaling it up, I get the option now to rotate the clip. So I actually want this to drop down and rotate, so I can bring my rotating in. And all of this only happens by a couple frames or so. But I can rotate it. I can also move it. And since I zoomed in, you can see the black there if I move drastically over. But the zoom in gives me some leeway here to work with this. So I can hit 0 frames there. And now on this, I'm going to move 1 frame over. I'm actually going to start keyframing this. So the rotation is at 4 degrees. I'm going to hit the add keyframe button on the right, move 1 frame to the right, and we'll do this up to like 6 frames. I can go down a little bit and then start adjusting the keyframes. And then it kind of bounces up and then back down, I noticed. So here you can see you get a little bit of movement here in that plate. And if we go back to the original video, we can see that movement comes through and we get the little pop in, and now we need the effect, right? So I'm going to go in my color effects. I can see here's black and white. I'll add the black and white one. In the effects browser, you could certainly go through here and change what that black and white effect looks like. And then they also had kind of the aged film look, right, with like the line going across there. So if we look at Final Cut's effects here, I think it's under distortion. No, maybe looks. Let's see. Yeah, there's a 50s TV look. But if you know there's another look in there, like I know there's one in here that's more of a film look, I'm going to hit all video and audio, go down to search, and I'll type in film. And yeah, there's an aged film video effect, so I'm actually going to apply that one. And with it selected, I can see here's my aged film. There's before and after. But the aged film is actually making it more of that like red teal, so I can put the aged film up before the black and white effect. And that means aged film is going first, and then it's applying our black and white filter. Right, so we can see that going through. Now, the other thing I noticed on the effect is that line doesn't show up until a little bit later. But right now on our effect, the line that's going up and down here is happening right away. So you can actually keyframe any of these parameters. So those are the scratches, right? Those lines that are vertically going up. So I'm actually going to start this off at 0. And then as I go to the end of the clip here, I'm going to increase that maybe to 3 or 4 lines there. Let's get a couple. There we go. There's a big one. We'll get up to 7. So now if we play it back, see the little jitter there, and then the lines come up at the end. And again, that's the same thing that happened with this one. Let me break apart the one I tested earlier. I'm going to do Shift-Z to fit the timeline. Here's that clip, and if I select it, you can right-click on it, control-click on it, and say Show Video Animation. This will go up and show you all the various keyframes that I put in. So let me go through frame by frame here. We can see normal video, and then right as we start here, the rotation of the video happens, the Gaussian blur, the age film, all of that stuff is happening to this clip. Watch over here in the inspector as I go through this. You'll see the rotation starts at 5 degrees, goes up to 8 degrees, stays at 8, but then the position starts to change. Everything kind of stays for a frame there. And then we rotate back over to 0. And we're moving the position of the plate around. Everything's kind of moving just a little bit to get that subtle movement. And again, this isn't something that I could do extremely fast. This did take some playing with to get the right look to it. But then you can see that's the kind of the final output with that shakiness. And obviously, this is just someone eating a sandwich there or some eggs. So a lot less dramatic than what we have here with someone on the ground there, but it's that same kind of effect that you're seeing in the aged film and all of that. So if you shoot it very well, you can then create some pretty cool effects from it. So yeah, that's essentially what I did there. Again, just kind of summarizing there. You're going to cut the frame where you want it, which you don't have to. You can still keyframe that as well, but I like to cut it just because I know this first part was normal, and then the rest of it's where the keyframes happen. And then we're keyframing the rotation, keyframing the position, moving it up and down. We added the aged film effect, added black and white, and if you don't add those in the correct order, you can always reorder them. And then you can go through and add that Gaussian blur to kind of soften everything up. That's something I didn't do here. So what I did with this under blur, I went and did my Gaussian blur, and I did it very lightly. I think I put this at 5, just to add that another subtle change to it. Again, this is without the blur and then with the blur. The compression on YouTube, you might not even be able to see that change there, but very subtle. But that's just to give it a little bit more of a softer look, like what happened here. That's what I did to get that part of it. So hopefully that makes kind of gives you general direction as far as where you're going to try and create that effect. Obviously, it's very complex. You can probably go and find some templates out there that someone's selling to create an effect like this that they've built in Motion or somewhere else, because it is tedious to do all of that manually, like I just showed you. But it's a great way to go. If you can get really, become a master of those effects, it'll save you a lot of money on third-party stuff like that. Awesome. So then I saw another question that came through on a Creative Cow form asking, I rotated a clip using transform. Now I want to use the Ken Burns effect to go to say move from left to right horizontally, but the effect only seems to move vertically, as if I didn't rotate the clip initially. So This can kind of sound kind of confusing. So here we have an overhead shot. I'll just play this through. Car is driving on the right side on the road, right? So this person has a clip, and essentially what they need to do with the clip is they need to rotate it in some way. So say we rotate it so that instead of the car going from bottom to top, the car is now going from right to left, right? So they've rotated it, and then they want to do the Ken Burns effect. So we kind of want to zoom across the car. So if I go into the little crop menu here and hit Ken Burns, notice how the clip rotates back to the original layout. The car's going up and down instead of left and right. So this is where it can get kind of confusing on how you're doing that Ken Burns effect, because it's trying to apply it to the original orientation of the clip. It can get kind of confusing. So the solution for this is, before you do the Ken Burns effect, I'm going to hit reset and remove the crop settings on there. You do your rotation, then select your clip and either right click or control click on it and say new compound clip. You can use option G as well to create that compound clip. Now with the compound clip selected, you can go in and we'll select our Ken Burns effect. Now notice when I hit Ken Burns, it did not flip the video to the original orientation. It's still like it is here, and if I want to, I can go through and make my adjustments. I can hit the preview button on this clip, and I can see there it's following right to left across the street. It's not perfect. This is just some random clip I chose. But by putting that clip into a compound clip, you're then able to use the Ken Burns effect without it using the final orientation. So that was the answer over there on the Creative Count forum. So I like seeing those questions come up. And then the final question came up with our shortcut post that we had today. So let me pull up this post so you can see that. If you're following Final Cut Pro Help Live on Instagram, you saw this post. If you're following over there, you know I try to post a new shortcut every single day. And here's the shortcut from today, which is Command Option Delete. And that shortcut does something kind of cool, which I did not demonstrate accurately on the post. So what Command Option Delete does is it deletes just a selection, is what I put in the description of this, but it actually does more than that. And I had a back and forth with someone on Twitter where I have this posted as well, and we went through and kind of discovered a whole bunch of things that you can do as far as various delete options go. So I want to go through these so that you can see them and kind of understand what that shortcut is. Because there's some cool things you can do. So the first thing is, if you hit the R key, that brings up your range selection tool, and then you can click and drag across parts of a clip to select it. And there's a few things you can do here. So the first thing is, if you just press the delete key, what that does is it deletes that selection and moves everything over to the left. You'll notice the connected clip that's at the top here moved over to the left. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, and then I'm going to hit delete again. Notice it deleted that gap, closed everything together, and moved the connected clip over to the left. If I do Command Z, undoes that, pushes it back over, right? So the shortcut that I posted today was Command Option Delete. So Nick on Twitter there posted the first comment. He says, that is unnecessary. If you make a range selection and then just hit the backspace, this will delete the selected part. And yes, that's accurate. That's what we just did here, right? Delete, and it moves it over. But in reality, and what I didn't demonstrate in the video, is that doing this deletes just the selection without manipulating the connected clips. Right? So now I'm going to do the shortcut, which is Command Option Delete. So Command Option Delete. Notice it deletes just that selection, but keeps the connected clip in the same location. right? So this top clip stayed right where it was. Let me do Command Z. I'll undo that. I have my selection down here with the range selection tool, Command Option Delete. It moves that clip over on the primary storyline, but does not impact any of the connected clips. So that's what that one does there. And then the other part that he was saying is in that case, you can just do the range selection tool and just hitting the delete key instead of the backspace key. And what that does, in my case, I don't have a full keyboard, so I'm going to do function delete, which is the same thing as pressing that little delete key if you have an extended keyboard. If you do that, it'll delete the selection and leave a gap in the place and not affect anything else. So again, to summarize, if you just press the delete key, it deletes the selection and moves any connected clips over to the left or right, I guess, depending on how you're deleting. If you do function delete, which is like doing the little delete key, it'll delete that clip, the selection, and just leave a gap clip. Or you can do the shortcut Command Option Delete to delete the selection, move those clips over, but leave all the connected things in place. So, Nick, that one's for you. Hopefully that helps clarify what that does. I know my video did not do a great job of demonstrating that, but next time that shortcut comes through, hopefully I'll update that one so you can see it. And this is a longer stream, but that is what I have for you. I don't see any other questions there in the chat, so let's go through the rest here. That's the demo of using an eGPU. Again, additional resources. This channel's huge. Make sure to subscribe. You'll get any additional posts that come out. You can hit the little bell on there to make sure that you receive a notification when we do go live in the future. If you go over to anawesomeguide.com, I try to post additional tips and things on that website as well. Don't hesitate to share at Final Cut Pro Help with anyone, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the good social media stuff. The bigger this community grows, the more I can do this, the more tips I can share with you. And the best way to get a hold of me is just from an email, finalcutprohelp@me.com. Secondary, I'd say Instagram direct messages. I'm usually pretty good about getting back to those as well. Twitter and Facebook are lesser, but I'll definitely get to them at some point as well. So I hope you learned something on this episode 14 of Final Cut Pro Help Live, which gave you an introduction and probably a little bit more of eGPUs, what they can do. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any feedback, best thing to do is send me an email. You can always leave it in the comments as well, but if you want something, if I didn't answer a question, you want an answer to it, make sure to email finalcutprohelp@me.com. And yeah, if you are watching this live, thanks for staying up and watching it, and have a wonderful rest of your nights.